I'm a sexuality educator and consultant, and I have, in my most recent work, been specializing in working with people who were raised in very conservative religions when it came to sexuality. So, what I usually refer to as purity culture, meaning a very rigid system of control around gender and sexuality, the kind of beliefs that prioritize women's sexual purity and teach people that sex is a very dirty, shameful thing. So my work has really taken the focus of countering all of that and working with people to help them get a healthy sense of their sexuality.
Would you say that definitely I think American culture, but most cultures have in general been raised in purity, what do you call it?
Purity culture.
Yeah, most cultures have been raised in what we would call the purity culture.
Yeah, it's interesting because purity as a value around sexuality isn't something that's unique to Christianity. Like you also can find this stuff in other major world religions. But the way that it has been experienced, at least in America in the last, I don't know, 40 years, is there's been this massive movement to teach young people that sex is something that should be reserved exclusively for marriage, and like an industry sprung up around it. So there's been, you can sign purity pledges and get purity rings and go on purity retreats. So it's also like an industry. But I do think that this lighter version of it is through a lot of cultures, and American culture especially. So even if you didn't grow up going to church all the time and getting that messaging, a lot of the same messaging is in just general pop culture, like teaching us that women can be slutty and that men are not, and teaching us that it's your fault if you're sexually victimized. There's a lot of purity culture stuff even in general pop culture and society.
I wonder, obviously, a lot of this focus is around, with our interviews, around camming, and most models are women. And so I'm wondering, is that part of, because there's a ton of stigma still in regards to the industry in camming, which is interesting because um, you know, it's all virtual, no one touches anyone, you
Yeah.
know? And I'm wondering, you just mentioned, women can be slutty is kind of this consciousness, but men cannot. And is that kind of part of why some of these industries get so harshly stigmatized when it's predominantly women that are doing something that might be sexual in nature?
Oh, yeah. I totally see that as just a reflection of the misogyny in our culture and misogyny around issues of who gets to be sexual and who doesn't, who gets to be in charge of their own sexuality. Because if a woman is camming and she's choosing to do that, she is taking ownership in my mind. And that's something that a lot of people, I think, really have trouble with. And since camming is a way that people engage in sex work, that is something that is so stigmatized in purity culture. Like the belief that sex is something that should be reserved specifically for your partner and your spouse. So just the idea that there are women out there that are like, no, I'm actually going to utilize my sexuality for whatever purposes I want. That's really a lot for some people to handle.
Fascinating, fascinating. Yeah. And even I know some people go as far as saying that it's really reserved for reproduction, even
Yeah.
more than just your spouse, or, it's really reserved for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a random question, but I'm curious. What would you say is the most interesting piece of research or information, just something that pops into your mind that you've, stumbled across?
I love this question because I always have the same answer, and that is that every single species, every mammal species, the female has a clitoris. And that includes dolphins. And actually, the dolphin's clitoris is very similar to the structure of the human female. And so there's no way we can say that, sex shouldn't be pleasurable, because there's no other purpose for a clitoris other than to provide sexual pleasure. It doesn't have some sort of other scientific or biological function. It feels good. So every female mammal has the clitoris.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And you brought up an interesting word, purpose. So,
Yeah.
purity culture, it seems like we talked about, it's teaching us that sexuality is for only one of two things, either procreation or just for your monogamous relationship and nothing outside of that, you know?
Yep.
Um, what is, in your opinion, the purpose of sexuality based off of your, experience and your research?
I think it serves so many different purposes to different people. It is connection, it's pleasure, it's a way for us to be close to our partners. It's something that makes us feel good. Sometimes people, I mean, we can use is kind of a bad term. I feel like that's a little stigmatizing, but we can have sex for so many reasons. We can have sex because it draws us closer to someone, just because it's pleasurable, just because we have like the physical urge to do it. And we can also have sex for practical reasons, like if we have sex for money, if that's how we make our money. To say that my beliefs about what sex is for should be everyone's beliefs, I would never say that. But to me, it is just one of the most like pleasurable and normal parts of being a human.
I love that. It's interesting because one of the first words that you used, if not the first word that you used as the purpose for our sexuality, is connection.
Mhm.
And that is certainly in line with what I have found to be true in not only my own life, but just even kind of studying this industry myself in a way, and seeing I've interviewed a lot of members of Live Jasmine, and I've interviewed several of the models, and when I ask members what it is that keeps them coming back, to a particular model, because sexuality is free on the internet, but they are paying money for something.
Yeah.
And when I get to the root of it, it is always connection.
Hmm. Yeah. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, one of the things that I find so upsetting about very puritanical views of sexuality is that they really ignore our need for human connection. Like, I've spoken to people who were raised in purity culture who were like not allowed to even be friends with the opposite sex. They were not allowed to hold hands. They were not allowed to hug each other. And like humans need connection. We need touch. But if we can't get the touch or we want other kinds of connection, like the camming is, it makes so much sense to me as to why people seek that out. Like we are wired to want to be connected to each other and to want to be like seen by another person.
What groups of people do you think are potentially benefiting the most from the camming industry?
I'm imagining mostly men who are, I mean, not all, but men are what come to mind first and foremost, but men who may have some kind of like shyness to overcome or really a lot of insecurity about connections with women, who feel like they want to engage with a woman and are really not finding that that is easy for them. I think that's one of the ways that it can be really useful for people that might not have the kind of social skills necessary to like go out and strike up a conversation with a woman in a bar or a woman on a dating app. I think that it's really giving sort of like an opportunity for people who want to connect with the women who are camming to be able to do that in a place that's not going to judge them and that's going to feel safe to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also, people who may have a disability or something that prevents
Yes.
them from socializing in the normal way that we might, like going out to a bar or whatever the case is.
Mhm.
I've found that that is really a group that's being served.
Absolutely.
Um, we basically just came through one of the strangest periods in, I think, all of our lifetimes with the pandemic, where most of us experienced some degree of isolation on some level. What role do you see sex tech playing in situations like that?
Oh, I mean, I am so grateful that we had the ability to have face-to-face video connection with people during like the most intense lockdown periods of COVID. And I mean, if I wanted to, be able to see my parents and things like that, and it's like, again, humans need connection with each other. We do not thrive when we are like super disconnected from the people we love and from our communities. And during the period of like really intense COVID isolation, I mean, sex tech played a massive role, and people were afraid to date. People were afraid to go out and like meet other people in person. There's always like, back before we knew anything about how the virus worked, like it was so scary that nobody was willing to just meet up with a stranger and have a date with them. And sex tech, in particular camming, or having the ability to speak to someone and look at someone, filled that void and really was able to help a lot of people feel, again, connected and seen, and to provide them with pleasure. And if we didn't have that, I think it would have been a lot more mentally tough on people than it already was.
How do we, like the more I learn and the more experts I talk to and educators I talk to, it just seems like our sexuality is so much more about connection than it is really, I think, any of the other stuff. Um, Whether we're conscious of that or not, I think it seems that the research points to there's something in us as human beings that's so innately wanting the deepest connection we can get, and sex is a way to, or intimacy is a way to fulfill that.
Mhm.
How do we move forward culturally in understanding this and creating healthier narratives around our sexuality?
I feel like this is the like primary center thesis of my work, is like getting people to just destigmatize the need to express our sexuality and to connect with other people. So moving forward as a society to have a healthier view of this it is stressful to even think about, because I feel like it's such a battle and it's a long-term project. And I think one of the best ways we can do that is just be really open and honest and destigmatize our own experiences with sexuality, and then in turn like raise the next generations to not have the same hangups and shame and fear around sex that a lot of young people were already raised with. So I hear all the time people are like, yeah, I was told all these horrible bad things about sex, but I don't want my kids to grow up believing the same thing. And I think that is such an important piece in moving forward as a society, is for us to think critically about, what do we believe about sex, how, again, healthy and natural it is as a part of life, and how we can pass those values on to the young people in our lives so that they're not growing up with the same like shame and fear that a lot of adults have.
So basically, we're kind of the pioneers, right, that are setting up hopefully future generations.
Yes. And it's difficult right now because, at least in America, there's a massive backlash against like any kind of sex education, against any kind of sort of like, normalization of queerness or kink or polyamory. Like, there are a lot of folks that are very deeply committed to that, like, rigid conservative view of sex as only being for reproduction and in being incredibly harmful otherwise. So there's a lot of opposition right now, and I think we can't lose sight of how important it is to fight against that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess if you look back in history, any kind of forward movement initially was met with some type of opposition until, I don't know, the science spread enough, the conversations got strong enough that it became much more accepted as factual or true or whatever the case is. Um, I want to be fair though to the other side that's like, this is dangerous when you're too open sexually or when you're consuming sexual content. Do you see drawbacks to we can just using camming, for instance, this industry, looking at that. Are there drawbacks to men who are connecting with these models online or whatever the case is, or
I,
women who are sharing their sexuality in that way?
I think that to say there are like drawbacks generally would be painting with a too broad of a brush. I think that it should involve each own individual's own experience of what they're engaging in. So I know for some models, it is probably just the most accessible and completely healthy feeling way to make a living, and there's nothing about it that feels bad to them. I know other people who have been involved in various kinds of work, whether it's like modeling, camming, or dancing or other kinds of things, who do feel like at one point they were maybe not doing it when they were feeling at their best, and so it was like not it was harmful to them, but not because camming in general is harmful. Do you know what I mean? Like harmful to them because of something that was going on for them. And I think that for men who are connecting with models and being consumers of the services, it could go so many different directions. Like you can have a completely healthy relationship with someone you are paying to engage with you online, or you could become like so, I guess, deeply into that kind of method of communication that it is interfering with other parts of your life or interfering with your relationships that exist outside of the you and the model relationship. But to say that there are general drawbacks for everybody, I don't think that I could say that.
Right. Okay, yeah. Yeah, because there are some things where it's like there are clear issues there, like there's not much of a benefit. But like you said, it's how it's being used because you're absolutely right. I know models that are like this is what I live for. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like this is their passion. They
Yeah.
see themselves as an artist,
Mhm.
like they're performing. They have this persona and they see themselves as like human connection artists. They know how
Yeah.
to connect with people very deeply.
And that's so powerful.
Yeah,
Well, like that's how I feel as an educator. I'm like, oh my God, I'm really good at this and I'm really compelling. And I can imagine that's the same feeling, like a high you get from being so skilled in that way.
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting because well, just taking it back to that point, some models are truly passionate about this, and it's not just because they're trying to make it ends meet.
Mhm.
This is the ends. This is what they
Yeah.
love.
I have worked with or even had friends who work in various industries, like as models or dancers or escorts, and have felt like the other people in their lives being judgmental about it was the hardest part of the work.
Right. Yes.
That I'm also imagining. Like, it could be all good and fine, but if you have a partner that hates that you're doing it or something that's making it extra difficult, I know that in that case it's can be super stressful.
What's interesting is that most of the members in general, especially if they're repeat members, are there specifically for connection, and yet they may face such harsh judgment or stigma that they're being excluded from a whole other group. And so it's almost like they're losing connection too.
Yeah.
So they're going to the service for something a little bit deeper, but
Mhm.
then they're being excommunicated from their friends or their family or whatever the case is. What type of effect do you think that that could be having on someone psychologically?
Well, what I hear you describing is stigma, like being stigmatized for wanting to participate in this service, being stigmatized for seeking out this kind of connection. And I mean, it's shame. It heaps shame on people, which is very damaging. Shame makes us feel like small and embarrassed, and it makes us hide our behavior further. So if like I'm somebody that enjoys talking to cam models and all the people in my life that I've told act like that is so lame and that it's so, like I'm a loser for doing it, it's going to make me feel like I don't want to share anything with those people anymore. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to connect with somebody over this medium. Before we had audio and visual, we had phone lines where you could call and speak to someone. Like we had so many, like I always say this about sexuality too. This is another interesting sex fact, is that every single time there is a new technology created, even when it was back in like the 1800s and we created the printing press, that and the telephone, that technology would be almost immediately used to connect with other people sexually. That's how the internet immediately, phones, okay, I'm gonna have a sexy conversation. The internet, people started chat rooms, and now that we have this visual aspect, of course it's going to be used for that kind of connection. So like it's human history.
It is so fascinating to me, and you're so right. Another interesting thing about the site is that I've heard both model and members say like they learned about themselves because let's say a model was asked to play out a fantasy with a member and then she realized, oh, I like this. And then
Mhm.
she realized she learned about herself. Same with members. It's almost like they're able to kind of explore things, which obviously they're not doing it physically. It's
Yeah.
all online, but they're still able to kind of safely explore and learn more about themselves. How important is it for us to explore our sexuality like that?
I think it's so important, and that it's a thing that we can do for our entire lives if we're open to it. I think we can always learn new things about our sexuality. Um, I tell people all the time that I'm constantly learning things about myself that I was like, oh, I have everything figured out. And then I'm like, oh shit, I guess I don't. And I think that as long as we're open to it, we can learn that there are like new things that interest us that might have never crossed our minds like 10 years before. And so having the ability to safely explore that is invaluable. One of the things I hear from my clients all the time is like, well, I don't even know what I like, and I don't even know how to begin to figure that out. So having someone else sort of guide you through that and be able to test it with you and like, I don't know, figure it out and kind of trial run your ideas without judgment, without shame, without stigma, because it's got to feel a lot safer bringing up a fantasy to a model than it would be for some people to bring up to like a partner, honestly.
Yes, absolutely. I have heard model or members have told me that they are very afraid to act something out with their actual spouse.
Mhm.
They're afraid of being judged. They're afraid of scaring that person or, going there, but they want to experience it. And so this is kind of a safe way to do that to some degree.
Absolutely. And I think it's wonderful that it's an available outlet for people. I know my view on monogamy is probably a lot different than some people's. I think that if you have a like a something that you want to do and your partner can't give that to you, that I believe that there should be the flexibility in relationships to find what you need in other places, as long as people are aware that's the arrangement. So I can only imagine, like, yeah, if I knew that I couldn't give my partner something they really wanted, I'd be happy if they found it in a safe environment, like having a conversation with a model.
Absolutely, a professional, basically. You know what I mean? Because again, while there is a true connection that develops, she's also really doing a job. There's
Absolutely. Yeah, to me, that sounds like a quite safe and practical way for a person to get to explore something that they know there's no outlet for in their relationship.
I'm curious, in your opinion, we're moving into such a digital age in every way. Sex tech is on the rise. Social media is probably one of the number one ways of communication. And Even when you're applying for a job, they're checking your social media now,
Yeah.
your digital footprint. Um, are we helping or hurting ourselves? How important are online relationships? Are they just as important, less important, equally, or different? What are your thoughts?
Hmm. I honestly, I mean, I'm somebody that has had so many important online like friendships and relationships over the last 20 years that I would never say that there's no value or that there's little value to online connections. I have met some of my closest friends this way, and they might be people that I don't see in person that often, but to kind of, I don't know, blow off the importance of online connection, I think really misses the value that online relationships can provide to people. They're not the same as in-person relationships. There is obviously a different experience of being in a room with someone, of physically touching someone, of having someone in your, everyday space, but you can still have a very significant connection with someone that you speak to online, especially if you're seeing them on a regular basis.
Absolutely. I agree. So, and it brings something different to the mix. It's kind of nice when you're just going through it or having a bad day to have your Instagram bestie or whatever that you send your
Yeah,
voice note to or send a voice
yeah.
note on WhatsApp. And it's this quick, effective communication that I have felt is very comforting at times.
For sure. And I'm thinking, like, I have never even met my own therapist in person. She's someone that exclusively, she lives in my computer. You know what I mean? And that's like no less significant than other relationships I have with people. Like, I have become very trusting of her, and she knows all of my like deepest stuff. So yeah, we can no longer, like, we might have done it in the past, dismiss the significance of online connections.
Right. Very well and beautifully said. And I think that's like the point we are right now in this evolution, which is now we're all waking up to the fact that these types of relationships are here, they serve a purpose, and we can't, like you said, dismiss them.
Mhm. Absolutely. There's no undoing that. Like, we can't put it all back in a box and, make it go away. Like, this is how we connect with people in 2022. And the pandemic, of course, has just emphasized that. Like, there are still, school happening online and remote work, and we connect with colleagues and friends and family. So it just makes sense to me that it is a really important part of our experience seeking out our community and our need to be connected to people.
Thank you so much. Are there any other thoughts you have about the industry or the space or any research you've come across that we haven't touched on that you'd like to?
I mean, I think one thing that I would want to say is that, like, I believe so strongly that we need to destigmatize the entire industry, the entire adult industry. This is work. This is a service that people are paid to do, and I also think that we should destigmatize people's desire to consume the service. I think that we'd be a lot better off if we didn't make people feel like shitty losers for wanting to connect with a model, and didn't make the people doing the work feel like they are some kind of like bad immoral person for doing this work. And I think that the way we shame people for either doing the work or consuming the work is a function of how negative our society is about sex and sexuality. And I think that harms all of us.
100%. I really love how you said that. That was really powerful. You've shared so much about how sex tech connection, sexuality in general, it basically takes us to a place of intimacy connection, which is something that we innately need. So it's probably keeping us sane. My question to you, your thoughts, where would we be without sex work? Because how many powerful people are secretly, using it to take the edge off or get their connection and stay sane? Where would we actually be if sex work was taken away?
I can't even imagine. I mean, we see in places where it's heavily criminalized that it forces it underground, which creates the most dangerous conditions for the people in the profession. And anytime something is so deeply criminalized, that is such a natural part of life, a thing that's not going to go away, such as other, sexuality things and reproductive health things, it just creates a really dangerous atmosphere in which the product is still going to be consumed. But as we continually push like people doing the work into the margins, it puts them at risk of violence, of death, of all kinds of awful outcomes, like bad sexual health outcomes. So the more we pretend like it's not there, and the more we try to crack down on it, we just make it so deeply unsafe for the people doing the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Everything was just so well said. Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this interview. I like to end the interviews by asking one final question, which you've touched on it. Um, how do we create a more sex positive society overall?
Uh, it is such a big question. I think that we have to get really real with ourselves about how we feel about all the sexual messaging we've gotten from other people. So if we've gotten messaging from our families, from our churches, from pop culture about, men are this way, women are this way, sex should be this, like, do we really believe that? Does that reflect the reality of our lives? Have we harmed other people using those beliefs, and why do we do that? Why do we feel the need to be controlling, so controlling of this aspect of our lives? And I think until we can take a good hard look at our own beliefs and how what we really truly feel and what we truly value when it comes to sex and sexuality, that it's going to be hard to move forward. So one of the things I always recommend people do when I'm working with them is to just really sit down and be like, where'd you get all your messaging about sex, and does that serve you now? And like, why don't you create your own brand new ethics around it, and start living by your own ethics? And I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Kind of reevaluating, are these actually my beliefs or was I just raised with them? Let me get to know myself here, you know?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, it was great talking to you.